for sports. That's why we're here today. Over the past 2 weeks, this ministry has been able to invest over $364 million in additional funding for our hardest hit sectors. This includes $62 million for our iconic institutions, $25 million for our core cultural institutions and our artists, $105 million yesterday for community building, which includes a $50 million investment into sports and recreation, $2.7 million for our provincial sport organizations, $2.5 million for music, and $2 million for the museum. This is on top, of course, of the $150 million travel incentive that we will be rolling out with the Ministry of Finance. Our sectors, as I mentioned, have been hit first, hardest, and will take the longest to recover. On March the 12th, that was the day the game stopped. I will remember it forever. My daughter Victoria was turning 15, and as the sports minister, I had to inform her that her hockey tournament in Toronto would be cancelled. Sport is a very important part of our cultural fabric as Ontarians. It makes us cheer. It's indelible in all of the different opportunities that we have in our local community to build up young athletes, bring parents and friends and neighbours together, and it gives us a sense of pride at the national level. Sport in Ontario also is big business. It represents $12.6 billion in economic activity. And for us to recover, we're going to have to look at both our investments as strategic for our cultural fabric, but also for our economic recovery. And that's why it's important for us to have an eye on a playground to podium approach, while at the same time looking at making sure that sports tourism and sports businesses are viable post-pandemic. In the early days of the pandemic, I created 2 ministerial advisory committees that helped guide our reopenings for major league sports and their professional teams, as well as our amateur athletes. And I'll have a little bit more to say today. But it's important for us to invest at this time for our provincial sport organizations at the grassroots level, while at the same time continuing to support our high performance and professional and Olympic athletes. Today's announcement is to set our athletes up for success, to ensure that they have a safe return to play with respect to COVID-19, but also in the longer frame, looking at their physical safety and their mental health after COVID-19. Key to all of this will be for all of us in Ontario to restore confidence, which we know has been quite difficult during this pandemic. Today's announcement specifically is $15.3 million to support 4 initiatives. The first is $3 million in 2020 to 2021 for Sport for Ontario. They will deliver a pilot program that helps kids and families regain confidence in sport and recreation activities. The program will allow support grassroots physical activity and recreational programming. It will promote mental wellness and safety in sport that is free from harassment, abuse, and discrimination. What's really exciting about this project is we will leverage our strong relationships with our professional sport organizations, their charitable foundations, and the Canadian Olympic Committee as we cheer on our athletes in Tokyo. In addition, we will be providing an additional $3.6 million for 63 recognized provincial sport organizations to support their member community sport clubs who provide access to sports such as soccer, volleyball, skiing, etc. A portion of this funding will support their administrative costs, with the remainder being used to support member clubs across the province of Ontario. We are excited to continue to support our high-performance athletes, and that's why we will be contributing $6.36 million for Quest for Gold Canada to support approximately 550 Ontario athletes who have reached national competition level as part of Quest for Gold's Canada Card program. This initiative provides direct financial assistance to high-performance athletes, enhancing their ability to train by reducing the financial burden. This amount represents a one-time increase of $8,400 for national-level athletes. And let me tell you, it has had great success since this program was established in 2006, seeing our Olympic athletes from Ontario has increased threefold over that period of time, and we're excited to continue to work with the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian Sport Institute of Ontario to make sure our high-performance athletes, like Penny Oleksiak, like Andre Degas, and so many others, can continue to top podiums around the world, particularly at the Olympics. And finally, we know that this has been a very tough year on our OHL athletes and hockey athletes in particular. We are going today to invest $2.35 million to the Ontario Hockey League post-secondary education scholarship for athletes on 17 Ontario-based teams. This investment provides approximately $138,000 to each of the 17 teams to help them meet their player scholarship commitments. This is an initial investment, as we are continuing to work with the OHL on a return-to-play protocol and a safe return to play. So those costs are still being considered, and we continue to work with the OHL, and I spoke yesterday with David Branch to see how we can best achieve this. This is going to be a very important year for sport. As I said, we are going to be sending athletes from Ontario to the Olympics, but it will culminate in the 2022 Canada Games that are going to be held in Niagara. Sport will be very important as we recover both socially and economically in the province of Ontario. I'm happy to take any questions to talk about the pride of place and the pride of people that we have in Ontario's sport community. But before I do, I'd like to turn it over to a few special guests that have joined us by video.
Hello, I'm Michelle O'Keefe, Chair of Sport for Ontario. On behalf of Sport for Ontario, I would like to thank Minister MacLeod and the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries for this funding investment and your continued support of our organization. Sport for Ontario believes in the power of sport in strengthening the sport community. That is why we are excited for this opportunity. I am joined today by colleagues and directors of Sport for Ontario, Debbie Lowe and Cyril Leader, who are excited to share our vision. Debbie?
Thanks, Michelle. This is such exciting news. A return to sport at all levels of play is critical, and so too is making sure sport is a safe and inclusive environment for all, free of harassment, discrimination, and abuse. A return to sport also means the continued promotion and adherence of Rowan's Law. Another area to highlight is Sport for Ontario's commitment to mental health and advocacy and initiatives through sport and recreation. Now over to Cyril.
Thanks, Debbie. Through this wonderful initiative, Sport for Ontario will have the ability to work with existing nonprofit organizations and charitable sports foundations in Ontario, including those affiliated with our professional sport franchises. Amplifying our reach will allow us to increase accessible sport and recreation programming for more children and families in Ontario. This will include inclusive, virtual, and in-person sport and recreation opportunities for Ontarians of all levels and abilities, truly leveraging the power of sport.
Thank you, Debbie and Cyril. Thank you to the Minister and the Ministry for your confidence. We look forward to working with the sport community to get Ontario moving and back to sport.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to take any questions. As you can see, I'm proudly wearing my Nepean Wildcats jacket. That's the organization my daughter plays for, and I've had the privilege and opportunity over a number of years to be a trainer and a den mom. So over to you, Derek, to the phone lines.
Thank you. We'll take questions there from the telephone lines. First question, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, should you have any questions, please press star 1. Your first question comes from Brian Lilly with the Toronto Sun. Please go ahead.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Minister. Interesting announcement, but what I don't see is when kids can return to play. Depending on where you are in the province, it's vastly different due to the color-coded system. Here in Toronto and Peel, they can't even train at the moment. In red zones, it's maybe 10 kids. So for kids like your daughter who do want to get back on the ice, who are hoping for a return to baseball, football, or soccer this summer, do you think, based on all the evidence and the positive benefits, that it's time for Ontario to start looking at what other provinces have done to allow youth sport to continue?
Thanks, Brian. I can say in Ottawa, where I represent and live, my daughter has been playing hockey for the past number of months, with the exception of when we were in lockdown. We have been working with our 63 provincial sport organizations on those return-to-play protocols. So you're welcome to go to the ontario.ca website. We have a dedicated page on what those reopening plans are. And that work was done early on in the pandemic, thanks to the work of my ministerial advisory committee that was led by Cyril Leader, who we just heard from. So we'll continue to look at what the local conditions are. Obviously, we do want a healthy and safe return to play, but when you're looking at some of the modeling and the two issues that come to mind that concern me as a mother, one is these events sometimes become a super spreader event, and we've seen that happen in the city of Ottawa. The second issue that the Chief Medical Officer of Health has raised with me repeatedly over the past year, if one of these young athletes does get COVID-19 at a super spreader event, particularly if they're a high performance athlete or they have an opportunity to play at a professional level, the respiratory challenges that the young athlete may have further on could prohibit their professional or high performance career. So we don't take these decisions lightly. We are guided always by the Chief Medical Officer of Health and our public health units, and we continue to work directly with the sector on those important return to play protocols. I know that's probably not the answer that you wanted, but it's something that we spend a lot of time on within the ministry, and I must say my staff have worked around the clock throughout this pandemic in sport in particular because of the regulations and the process that takes. So I'm happy to take a follow-up, Brian.
Follow-up?
Yeah. On a different topic, you mentioned where you represent Nepean. There was a Liberal candidate set to go up against you. He has strangely resigned. I know it's a different party, but these sorts of things are odd. They don't happen often. Someone resigning 10 days after they get the nomination. Do you know anything about what's going on in your community, even though it is another party?
Obviously, I heard the rumors and the speculation over the past number of days, and it certainly has created some controversy in my community, particularly among the South Asian community. I don't normally intervene in family feuds, but this does have to do with my constituency of Nepean, where I've represented them for 15 years over 5 mandates. So obviously, I'm disturbed that Stephen Del Duca's Liberal Party either didn't properly vet a candidate or, even worse, is overturning a democratically chosen candidate. Nepean's not a banana republic. Perhaps that's the way Stephen Del Duca runs the Liberal Party, but I think that it's unfortunate that downtown Toronto elites can run roughshod over the people that I represent, even if they happen to be in different political parties. And Brian, you used to live in Ottawa, so you know that many of the candidates that I faced off in the past have become lifelong friends of mine. You know, Jack Upal, Laurel Gibbons, many of them whom I have great respect for and who have put their community first, as I have over this past number of years. So obviously, this is not a good news story for them, and we'll just wait and see what level of transparency they'll provide to my constituents.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Your next question comes from Chris Rishowie with the Toronto Star. Please go ahead.
Hey, Chris.
Hi there. Hi, Minister. Thanks for taking my questions. I was just wondering, last week you were quite optimistic about the OHL returning soon, and I'm just wondering, with the increase in the variant and reports, that we're in a third wave, if that's going to impact it at all.
Well, I don't think so, because I think when you're working with a league like the OHL or the AHL or the NHL, and you really look at what a bubble will look like, or if there is a hub, you take every necessary precaution. And we've been quite successful at the AHL and the NHL level, preventing the spread of COVID-19 and it even entering the bubble. So these are conversations. So we want to make sure that once we sign off on that return to play, that the integrity of that bubble will prevent the spread of COVID-19 or any of the variants of concern. And so that work, again, is ongoing. And I just want to reiterate to what Brian had said earlier, about the return to play. And my concern is, and this is something I've spoken with the Chief Medical Officer of Health about, is I don't want an athlete to go into a bubble that's been infected, create a super spreader event, and then have the next Olympian or the next NHL superstar sidelined probably permanently because of a respiratory disease that has been long-lasting. So we do have a great deal of concern here, but I think if we get to the point where we've got the Chief Medical Officer of Health signing off, then we will have an ironclad bubble that will protect the athletes and allow them to get a season in.
Follow-up?
Thanks. And can you talk a little bit about what went into the decision to allow contact in the OHL? And what will be allowed given the ongoing threat of COVID?
Okay, well, good question. So right now, contact in any sport outside of our professional sports organizations is prohibited. So we would need to get to the Chief Medical Officer of Health to sign off on contact given the integrity of that bubble. So to Brian's earlier point, those protocols at the amateur level and the minor sports level have been worked on by our provincial sport organizations. They're publicly made available. They have been for quite some time. But when it comes to specialized league, for example, the Canadian Elite Basketball League, the Ontario Hockey League, if they were to resume any type of contact, that would be signed off on their proposals. And just to give you a sense, when we signed off on the AHL and the NHL, their proposals were 600 pages long, rigorous testing, rigorous sanitation standards, rigorous protocols in place for the teams and the administration, and where in fact they were able to sit, that sort of thing. So a lot of detail goes into this planning in order for us to make sure that the athletes themselves will be safe, and that we can make sure that there's no long-lasting impact on their physical health post-COVID-19.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Your next question comes from Bob Belasinko with CTV. Please go ahead.
Hi, Bob.
Hi there, Minister. Nice to hear the announcement today. Good job.
Thanks.
Curious, not to beat a dead horse, but how close are we?
How close
are we to the OHL returning?
Yeah, I think if we can land something, I'm optimistic by the end of this month that we'll be able to make an announcement, and that they can get to work on selecting the locations or venues in which they will play. I'll leave once we've got the sign off, I'll leave the and the protocols in place. I'll leave the planning on when the season resumes to David Branch and his team. I had a great conversation with him yesterday. We're all working very hard to make this happen. We know that we know we've got some really great OHL players that are going to make a real difference in the game of hockey in years to come. But we want to make sure that we do that safe, so that we don't have an impact on their physical health.
Follow up.
Just changing topics here. Talking about the high-performance athletes, I know that some in this area from Windsor have left the province to go train just because of the restrictions. So just curious, in terms of the money, will they be compensated, I guess, for having made the move to a different province to train?
Yeah, that's interesting. We were one of the first jurisdictions in North America actually to open up for high-performance training with the Canadian Sport Institute of Ontario. We were the beneficiaries, obviously, of having an NBA team with the Toronto Raptors, and so much of the work that we were able to accomplish was started and led by the NBA, and we were able to adopt many of their practices, so that supported our efforts with that. The funding today is for the 550 athletes who've reached the national competition level, so that compensation will be dedicated toward them, many of whom will go to the Olympics and support us. So we want to make sure that there is funding over and above the federal funding that they have. I just want to say, looking at the stats over the years, when you're looking at this particular program, Quest for Gold, the value for money has been absolutely incredible, because you're directly investing into the athletes, and those athletes, through their high performance, are able to achieve amazing things. And again, through the statistics that we've seen since this program was started in 2006, I believe, the same year I was first elected to this chamber, we have seen our Olympic athletes just absolutely grow from this province, and there's a higher percentage of Ontario athletes on the Canadian Olympic team now as a result of these investments from this government.
Next question, please.
Your next question comes from Crystal Ramlaken with CBC Ottawa. Please go ahead.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Minister. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just wondering how this funding and these projects will impact Ottawa locally. Do you have any details on people who might be benefiting here in Ottawa?
Well, obviously, some of our athletes that play for the Ottawa 67s will benefit from the scholarship program, and I'm sure Mark Gowdy and those at the OSAG would be able to break that down for you. I know this $3 million program, Sport for Ontario, which will be led by the former president and CEO of the Ottawa Senators, Cyril Leader, will obviously have a tremendous impact. And a couple of the areas that we're looking at, obviously, as we move into the Canada 2022 Games, which will be hosted in Niagara Falls, we want to make sure our athletes are the safest in the country. We also want to make sure that their mental well-being will. So from the very organic level, the grassroots level, like at an Nepean Wildcats level, the work that they're going to be doing will help regain and restore trust and confidence in sport post-COVID, but also plan us out for a more successful sport year. With respect to the Quest for Gold, I know personally in my constituency there's always about anywhere between 3 to 10 athletes that qualify and that we celebrate. So we could get you a list on who will qualify this year. And with the provincial sport organizations, this is absolutely incredibly important. This allows us to retain the structure and the bones of the administration of all of those different organizations, whether that's the Ontario Hockey Federation, Soccer Ontario, Basketball Ontario, you name it. And so at a very high level, making sure that the policy work, the work for return to play, the safety standards, how we register, all of that, that will impact all of our local athletes.
Follow up?
I'm just wondering, has all this money already been allocated for, or can people still apply for it?
No, so the $3 million has obviously been allocated to sport for Ontario. The $3.6 million for the provincial sport organizations, there is flexibility for them to support some of their leagues. So that not all of it has been spoken for. The Quest for Gold money, that's $6.36 million, obviously is allocated to those high performance athletes who qualify. And then the $2.35 million will be going to the OHL, and they will distribute it based on their leagues. So this is all brand new money. Over, as I mentioned at the very beginning, at the beginning of the press conference, this ministry saw an allocation increase in the last year of $364 million in order to support our hardest hit sectors. And that's, hardest hit in heritage when you're looking at your museum closures, culture when you're looking at your galleries closed and film and television production ceasing, live music stopping, tourism, which has grinded to a halt, and we've had a very difficult year. And then, of course, here in sport, making sure that we can continue to not only flow the money that we already had, which is about a $35 million budget, but also increasing it between this announcement and one that we previously had. We're at about $18 million increase in sport right now.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Your next question comes from Justin Dunk with CHCH-TV. Please go ahead.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for taking my questions. First, the OHL is largely driven in terms of its business model around fans coming to games. Has there been any talks with the OHL around that? The Edmonton Oilers have applied for fans to come out in a limited capacity in Edmonton with the Alberta Health Services. Has there been any dialogue with the OHL about that, and is that something you could see in 2021?
So that will be, I think, ruled off the table in the immediate term. We have had conversations with the Senators and the Leafs, even this week, about what a return would look like. I know MLSE is very excited about receiving their stamp of safety, but at this point in time, that's not been cleared by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So when we talk to the OHL about their operations, what I foresee in order for them to get a season in is some additional financial support from us, but we're still too early in the game to assess what that actually is until we actually have the finer points dealt with in the return to play protocols.
Follow up.
And is there sort of a ballpark number that you think it will take to get the OHL back on the ice in terms of the commitment that you need to make? I know you sort of alluded to it, but is there a ballpark number, and what are some of those finer points you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think, I think it's far too early to speculate. We understand what a hub model for the NHL is, but I don't think we're looking at that type of, grouping that we had, and we know that cost, I think, $40 million. So I don't think we're looking at something that's steady or steep, but it will really rely on the fact of the Chief Medical Officer of Health's comfort of selecting whether it's one bubble or multiple hubs, what the comfort level is of the OHL going out and applying that. And then how many, if they do have hub cities, how many will there be? Would there be municipal support? Would there be other financial support for corporations in their communities? So there's so many. This is very complex in order for us to make this work. And so again, far too early to speculate, but just giving you a sense of the complexity here. We have to look look at sanitation costs, rapid testing costs, what it's going to cost for officials. So these are all the things that we are looking at the same time making sure that any protocol we have best reflects the safety standards that we're going to require for those athletes to get back on the ice.
Next question, please.
Your next question comes from Josh Brown with Waterloo Region Record. Please go ahead.
Hi, Josh.
Hi, Lisa. Most of my questions have been answered, but I just wanted to get some clarification on the mention that when it comes to the OHL with additional further funding coming. When will that come and what will that entail?
Yeah, again, we're still continuing to work on the details and to see what level of support they may receive from other areas, and we'll have a conversation. But that is also a lengthy process that requires going back to Treasury Board, and it requires cabinet approval and all those sorts of things. So I think we're probably a couple of weeks out before we get to that point. But you'll be the first to know.
Follow up.
Josh, do you have a follow-up?
No, I'm good. Thanks. Sorry.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Your next question comes from Dan Ralph with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Lisa. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you if where the province is in regards to the CFL's return to play. And I know that they've submitted that to government, but can you give an update as to where that might be?
Yeah, I haven't spoken with Randy in a bit. I have spoken with the Red Blacks just last week. I speak with Mark Gowdy quite frequently, obviously, because they are from my city, but they have so many teams with the OSEG, with the 67s, and of course Red Blacks. So I know that they're committed to a return. What that looks like, again, if they're going to a hub model, it has been undefined at this point in time, at least on my shop. We know early in the pandemic, when we thought we might have gotten last summer in, there was speculation that there would be a hub city. So I'll continue to work with Randy and others, and if they want to play in their own stadiums, what that would entail in terms of a Canadian bubble. But again, I think it's far too early to say, but we fully support the return of the CFL. And I'll tell you, I was looking forward as minister and getting down to Hamilton to support the Grey Cup and talk about the epitome of this ministry, heritage, sport, tourism, and culture. You look at the Grey Cup; it's historic. It is a sport. It's a driver for tourism, and of course the culture that comes with it, with the Canadian acts that participate in the halftime show. And I know I'll never forget being able to watch in my city in Ottawa when we hosted the Grey Cup, Shania Twain at the halftime show. So again, really hopeful that we can work to a solution for them.
Follow up.
I mean, we're now in March. They want to start playing, get to training camp in May. Is that a doable timeline given where we are right now?
Well, you know what? We continue. Every single day in COVID-19 is a different day. And as much as people say it's like doing the same thing over again, you don't know where the health conditions are at that moment. And so, we could say, well, we're optimistic for this to start on this date, and those dates, whether it's on hockey or CFL, have sometimes surpassed us. So, we'll continue to work with the league, and we're happy to have a great relationship with the league, and we're very proud of the 3 Ontario teams that we have in the league, and we'll continue to monitor the situation. I wish I had the crystal ball, and I wish this was all over so that we wouldn't be having this conversation, and we could see our guys back on the field. But, we've got great partners with the Ticats, Red Blacks, and of course the Argos, and just want to make sure that when it's safe for them to return, that we're there to support them.
Next question, please.
Your next question comes from Raphael Guillemette with Radio Canada.
Raphael, it's been a couple days since we last spoke.
Yeah, I was waiting to ask you again about the OHL. I was wondering, this time with the NHL draft looking to be set in late July, it's not going to be postponed. How many games are we looking at with the OHL, and is there a possibility that there's no playoffs, just playing the regular season for the sake of playing?
Look, I think that's far too early to say. I think the goal will be to get over 20 games in if we can. We're still working, as I said, through the protocols, and there is a process in place. But my hope and my aspiration here is to get that done before the draft. We recognize how critical that is. We know how important the OHL is as a feeder to the NHL and to the AHL and to other professional leagues around the world. So we want to do the best we can. And I ask you just to be a little bit more patient with us. as we work through these fine points of the return to play. And I know they're very excited up in the Soo. I'm seeing all your guys up there very, very excited about getting back to play.
Follow up.
And thinking about the Soo, the Memorial Cup tournament would be happening in Ontario this year. If it does happen, is this still a possibility? Is that another beast to tackle, having the champions of the Western Hockey League and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League play in Ontario this year?
We've not been approached about that at this point in time. I do know when I was up in the Soo in the summer, had the great opportunity to meet with the administration of the Greyhounds, and obviously there was a competition between them and I believe the Oshawa Generals, and so we would want to make sure that if a cup is going to be awarded in Ontario, that this government is there to support it, and so we were looking at different options there. But I would say it's too premature. And I don't have a lot of confidence it would happen in this before probably late 2021 or 2022, particularly as it pertains to the spread of COVID-19, the covariants that we've seen, and what level of inoculation we're at. I think that's really what, as the minister responsible for the hardest hit sectors, and many of whom have not yet been able to open, as you've heard here today, is really eyeing how many people are inoculated on a day-to-day basis, and that helps guide our return. And the Premier and the Cabinet have asked me to look at those seasonal reopenings, and so it's really quite something for us to watch and to monitor.
And last question.
Your final question comes from Scott Radley with Hamilton Spectator. Please go ahead.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, Minister. A couple things. I may have missed something, and so forgive me if I did, but at the beginning, we heard there was going to be the money for the youth sports, the grassroots. We heard there was going to be money for the elite Olympic athletes, and we certainly heard about the OHL. What about other leagues, other minor leagues, the Canadian Elite Basketball, I think you referenced, or the CPL, or is that still to come? Is that not something that's on the table? Where do they stand?
So that's a great question and very important question. So the $3.6 million will go to the provincial sport organizations, and then that will filter down to some level for the grassroots sports leagues. The other investment I made yesterday, it was a $105 million community building fund. $50 million of that will go to sports and recreation, both for capital and operating costs. So we will be encouraging those types of leagues to look at that level of funding to get some support. And of course, we do have an upcoming budget, and we will have a fall economic statement. So as we continue to monitoring the safe and cautious reopening of the Ontario economy, which includes sport, these will be things that we look at in the ministry with our colleagues over at Finance and Treasury.
Follow up?
The other thing was follow up about the OHL announcement, and you mentioned, and I think Dan Ralph was asking about it with the CFL. Or the follow up was, it seems like you said there was a first step. This was the first step. I want to be clear. Is there potentially more money if the bubble starts, if the league starts? Is there more money coming in for the OHL to function?
I'm optimistic that we can provide them some level of financial aid. What that is, I have no idea at this point because we haven't had the return to play protocol signed off, and we're not looking at the moment on where they might be playing. So the conversation is ongoing with them, and it's an important dialogue that is continuing.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.